Hi everyone, welcome at CEDLA. I'm Barbara Hogenboom. I'm just going to introduce Fabiano, Toni, and tell a bit the order of the day. And before I start doing so, you may have noticed we have a camera here that's not a common tool during our lectures, but I'm pleased that you're here. I think you're basically filming the talk, but if there's anyone who has a problem being in some kind of video, please, I don't know what your name is, sorry.
Aurelio.
Let Aurelio know, and then I guess he can solve that matter. But I think the purpose in the end is also to kind of put it online somewhere, right? For people who cannot be here.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you. Well, it's a great pleasure to have Fabiano Toni here. He's a big friend of CEDLA already from a long time. We jointly worked with a lot of other people in a big project we had a few years ago on environmental governance in Latin America. So he's one of the authors in this book. And he is working in the University of Brasília in the Center for Sustainable Development. Is that correct? Or development studies? No. Sustainable development, right? CDS. So basically he's there like just a few meters away from the power center of Brazil, where now of course Bolsonaro is ruling, and I think I'm very happy that you're going to tell us about what that new Brazilian order looks like. I think our general impression is basically cut all the budgets for environment and, yes, put people with very different, very corporate interests in control. But I'm sure that you will enlighten us on much more the details and also that kind of logic, if there is a logic behind this new environmental order. What we usually see here is indeed when the Amazon is on fire, or the worst kind of or most visible effects of these regime changes. But I hope you will allow us to understand better the kind of details and the processes that are more hidden for people as far away. Please, if you don't mind, come a little bit more in front, because then Fabiano doesn't have to talk to such a distant faces. So Fabiano Toni works here in the Center of Sustainable Development. You have a kind of human geography background, but you're much more focused now on environmental politics, not just in Brazil, also more regionally. And there's one book that we have in our library by you and colleagues that I will also show around, so people can get a bit of an impression of what you have been working on before you came to work on Bolsonaro's environmental order. So very happy to have you here, Fabiano. Oh, before I forget, Fabio de Castro, our colleague from CEDLA, expert on political ecology and on Brazil, will be the discussant for today. And at 5 o'clock we close the session here after a discussion with you and continue the discussion over drinks over there. So, Fabiano.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you for having me here. After so much time, we've been together, Fabio, Barbara, Mihio, and I, and a few other people in like 5 or 6 nice places in Latin America and Europe, but not here. It's my first time here in the Netherlands. You showed the book, and I was thinking this is already so updated because Latin America has completely changed since 2 years ago when we published the governance book. It's a completely different continent, and Brazil is, unfortunately, completely different. I'm going to talk about that a little, trying to understand what's going on in Brazil. And
you turn this on. Yes.
Is it through?
It's not working either.
You want to
Oh, you know, because you changed the...
Yeah. Well, basically, I guess we have 2 crises in Brazil. One is an environmental crisis, which I was supposed to talk about, and I will. But there is a democratic crisis. We need to discuss that because it's before it's too late. It's unfolding in front of us. Things are getting worse and worse in Brazil today, and we need to understand that. And my point is here, those two cries, they feed each other. And I may go on a limb and say that actually the democratic crisis was provoked by people who have vested interests in the environmental crisis. And I will explain why. And that's, I think that's one of the things that I want to develop in the following weeks, to write a paper on that, something that I just started to learn about, this idea of populism, which is not new for you here in Europe in general. Populist governments, especially right-wing governments, they are growing. They thrive on frustration, on fear, and especially after or during moments of economic change or cultural change, which happen together. I think it's clearly the case here in Europe because of migration, things like that. Not so much in Brazil. There is some frustration with the economic situation, and that has been blamed on the Workers' Party, which was also blamed for the economic growth that we had in the previous years. But that's the way the right-wing part got there, and I think there is a difference between what's happening in Europe, what has happened in Europe, still happening, and what happened in Brazil. And even in the United States and some other places. Because usually when we see a populist leader, especially a right-wing populist leader, climbing to power, there is a strong political party behind that. A strong extremist political party behind the leader, which was not the case in Brazil. Bolsonaro changed political parties. He literally rented a political party last year to run for president. It was really small, and he just announced that he's going to leave the party and start a new political party. So, where did his support come from? Basically, my idea is that it came from this group that we call the Bancada Ruralista, the Rural Caucus in Brazilian Congress, which has 38 senators out of a total of 81 senators in the upper house, and about half, 270 federal deputies out of 503. So it's about half of the lower house. And they are spread in 26 political parties. 26 different political parties, most to the right, some in the center. And you can, if you read the political programs of those parties, if they have one, it's going to be really hard to see where they stand in terms of ideology. But you're going to identify one common interest, which is property rights. These people, they got together in 1988 when Brazil was rewriting the constitution, and they were really afraid of land reform. So they decided to form this interest group within Congress to fight any real possibility of land reform, and they were very successful. Worked. Brazil, if we look at the Amazon, some people say there is a lot of land distribution, but it's not land reform. It's just colonization of the Amazon, which we have been promoting since 1972, something like that. After that, they were successful in blocking land reform. They decided to go further and so, well, we have rights other than land property. We should have full property of everything that's on land, because Brazilian legislation requires you to live, to have a farm in the Amazon. The law requires you to leave 80% of the forest on your farm. You cannot clear cut that patch of the forest. So they're fighting against it. They have been fighting against that, and they had, in 2012, they were able to change the law. We still have that kind of control of land use, but at least they were able to grant let's say, what's the word? Immunity to everyone who had clear cut before 2008. So they're no longer environmental criminals. Which sends a message to everybody who is there buying land or deforesting, you know, that can happen again. We can change the law again and again and again and get away with all the deforestation that we can. So those people really are behind change in our legislation. And I was just here at CEDLA the other day and I bumped into this new publication. It's a special issue of the Annals of the American Association of Geographers. And they talk about environmental populism, which is really the thing that Fabiano and I had been discussing in the previous week. I was reading some of the papers and I saw I could identify those 11 elements of populism, which I'm not going to go through because it's going to bore you to death. But anyone who is acquainted with Brazil today could identify all of those 11 elements in our current politics. I will come back to some of them in a minute. This depicts the crisis, and I will ask you to please go and check this website, because I owe this guy. He published this somewhere in Facebook in Portuguese, and I wrote him that could you redraw the picture in English, because I want to present this to my friend in the Netherlands, and he did that. Very nice guy, because he's very good at producing jokes and things like that. But I really like it because you probably heard about the fires in September, August, September. Amazonia was burning again, and I will show some numbers. Then we had the oil spills. We have at this moment, they are spreading. They started in the northeast, they are already somewhere in the southeast of Brazil. You probably heard of the two accidents we had. The dams, the Vale, the big, huge mining company, two of their tailing dams collapsed. That's, I don't know, was last year? This year? I don't remember the dates, but we are still suffering that. Close to 400 people died in one of those accidents, and one river died in the previous one, the Rio Doce. And of course, we have the silent, I would say, problem of pesticides in Brazil, which could be way larger on this map. It's reaching all the central savannas in Brazil, the Cerrado, and we don't talk much about pesticides in Brazil. Probably the reason is that we have been talking about deforestation. Deforestation has kind of captured the environmental agenda in Brazil, but that's becoming more and more evident that we do have a problem with pesticides. So I will go back to some of those elements of populism, namely this idea, this discussion on sovereignty against globalism, which is very big in Brazil right now. The idea of finding some internal enemies or scapegoats and direct anger toward those groups in Brazil, and we name some of those groups here. This rhetoric of anti-elitism, suspicion against experts, against science, against education, and finally, I think the most important, how the government is treating our institutions, trying to destroy, to discredit, especially those who resist the power of the executive branch. These are Bolsonaro's words when he was opening the UN General Assembly. I think it was in September 2. He went there and said that the UN should not work for the global interests. It was just an assembly of individual countries with their sovereignty and with their interest. So people should stay away, in other words, from Brazilian business. And again, everybody knows that we jumped out of the Conference of the Parties. Brazil was supposed to organize the Conference of the Parties, and in the beginning, this was something that Bolsonaro did after 2 or 3 weeks in government. And he was threatening to leave the conference at all, which would mean practically the end of the conference. Because Brazil, so far, Brazil could be called a kind of climate power. No single country did more than Brazil did to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions. So it's impossible to have a sound climate regime without Brazil at this point. We have more examples. We're full of examples of this kind of rhetoric against globalism, and that has, it's a kind of swear word, it's a bad word in Portuguese today for, especially for the government. And when they say you are globalists, it means you are communists. You are fighting against national interests. You are fighting against prosperity in Brazil. And he said that at the General Assembly, that the UN has been taken by socialists. It's kind of promoting socialism all over the world today. I have just a few examples. If we take this point of finding a scapegoat, direct anger against some groups, probably the indigenous people in Brazil are those suffering the most. But you can name any group, any minority, and he has said. We have to understand that Brazil is a Christian country. Bolsonaro said that. But he's targeting his anger at the indigenous people. And that's linked to that caucus, the rural caucus in Brazil. I said that they are defending property rights, but it's not only about their lands. They want more lands. They don't want lands under protected areas. They don't want indigenous lands, which are the most protected lands in Brazil, especially in Amazonia, even more than national parks. So if you read, this is just, I think this is the most outrageous. It's a shame that the Brazilian cavalry hasn't been as efficient as the Americans, who exterminated the Indians. That was before he was elected, but he's the same guy, still the same guy. And he's not being so harsh in his words, but in his acts. So I have a few more examples here that I'm not going to bring to you. Well, and the same goes for non-government organizations. He's directing his anger at NGOs. I will show a few more examples here. He just said that the Amazon fires could be caused by non-government organizations. He said that. It's on tape. That was during the fires, and now during the oil spill crisis, the minister of the environment said that Greenpeace probably was responsible for the oil spills, because one of his ships was crossing the Atlantic by that time, and they wanted to tarnish the image of the Brazilian government, so they did that on purpose. But unfortunately for the minister, now he's being held accountable. Greenpeace went to court in Brazil and said, well, now we have to prove that we did that. It's nothing new for the minister, because I have to say, I was saving this for later, he's a criminal. He was convicted in the lower courts because he committed a fraud when he was the Secretary of the Environment in the state of São Paulo. He changed the map to issue a mining permit in a protected area. He was convicted, and after that, he was appointed minister by Bolsonaro. Bolsonaro, the same guy who claims to be the champion of honesty and morality, the guy who took the Workers' Party from power because they were very corrupt. the discourse against science, against education, against complexity. I think probably INPE is the most visible victim so far. INPE is the Brazilian National Institute for Space and Atmosphere Research, which is very, very prestigious. We have one of their researchers here. And INPE suffered this year because they did their job. This chart shows the number of burning spots in Amazonia along the years. They monitor that. They have very, very good technology to do that, and they do that. And they publish. They go to the press and they publish in academic journals. Everything that they are supposed to do, they do, and they do well. But the president and the minister, they were really, really pissed off when INPE published that kind of data. They said that it was a bunch of lies. They said that the methodology was flawed. The minister said that they were about to hire a private company to do exactly the same kind of job. So we have to pay everybody the salaries in INPE, but he would pay somebody to produce similar data. The director of INPE was fired, and he was replaced by a military. Again, that's the same kind of data that INPE published, the annual deforestation rates in Brazil. We are just about to learn the last data that runs from August to July. So they have finished measuring deforestation, they are processing the data. It was supposed to be read by now, but the director general of INPE is a military right now, so he obeys his boss. So probably the numbers are there, and he's trying to figure out what to do with that kind of information. Again, now I'm showing the data, but not to talk about INPE, but to talk about this assault on the institution. That data shows we had our all-time high deforestation in 1996, close to something like 27,000 square kilometers in Brazil. And then again, in 2004, it was very close to this all-time record. And the government decided to launch a new policy. It was called the PPCDAN, the Plan for Control and Prevention of Deforestation in Amazonia. And it worked really, really well, as you can see here. Deforestation rates dropped in the following years. Now they're coming back, but what happened? After Bolsonaro took power, he just dismantled all the institutional framework behind this program. The heads of the program were fired, removed from office, extinguished the office. There was I guess it was not a secretary, but a director in the Ministry of Environment. It doesn't exist anymore. We don't have our climate secretary in the ministry anymore. The budget has been cut. It's really hard to pay for people. If you want to control deforestation, you need to monitor. And that's something that INPE does. They have two systems. They have the annual measurement of deforestation, and they have a real-time detection system that they say, well, there is deforestation going on somewhere in this place. So the environmental agency, IBAMA, can send people there. And that means sending a lot of people. They need to be escorted by the police or by the army, because loggers and miners usually are violent when they try to shut down their operations. So you have to pay a lot of people. You need cars, boats, ships, helicopters, airplanes. So it's really expensive. If you cut the budget, this is not going to happen anymore. That's what we are seeing in Brazil right now.
sometimes it works and then.
What? That we do yeah. A few other elements of this destruction of the institutional framework. Well, first, it's really hard to get a sense of this, but we had the Brazilian Forest Service was linked to the environmental agents, to the Minister of Minister of Environment. They were responsible, among other things. We created what we call CARD, which is a rural registry. Brazil is a mess, especially Amazonia, in terms of land property, titles. People say that there are some farms have multiple stories, right? My land, your land, someone else's land. There are a lot of claims on the same land because people don't know how they got those land titles. So the government was trying to sort that out. Just had everybody, every single landowner in Brazil had to produce a georeferenced map with his property, and also had to locate, say, well, where is your forest cover that you are supposed to have according to the law? Plot that on the map and send to the government. In possession of all that kind of data, the government could finally figure out who's responsible for environmental crimes, because in Peking detected deforestation, people go there, they map, they check, and they issue a fine. So, of course, it was the Minister of Environment was in charge of that, but they transferred that to agriculture, were exactly the same people who want more land, more deforestation. So people consider this just the end of the program. It's just useless. And already they have changed the law because they were supposed, after producing the map, we had a few other steps to come to finally say, well, you have what we call the environmental passive. You know, you should have, let's say, 100 hectares of forest here, but you have just 50 or 80. So now we have a plan for the next years, how we are going to recover this. So that's not going to happen anymore. They don't have to worry about that anymore. They just need to deliver the map and do nothing else.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
So how about the indigenous people that have a claim on land? It has been examined by FUNAI already. What's going to happen with these claims?
Nothing's going to happen to those claims. The president said himself that in his term, there won't be one additional hectare of land for the indigenous. He said that, and he put, there is a general, a military, as the head of FUNAI. So they're not going to do that. I think that was one of his first promises, and that's something that really attracted the attention of the rural caucus, this idea that there won't be more indigenous land. That's why the indigenous are the most vocal group in Brazil today, because they know they have a lot to lose in the next years.
Yeah.
So they are really ahead of this resistance movement against
But
Bolsonaro.
also, I think the Workers' Party of Lula also didn't do so much about these claims. Eh? They were documented, but never recognized by the government.
The claims?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think you had a group of indigenous visiting you a few weeks ago, and I guess they told that, well, we don't like Bolsonaro, but we fought with Lula and Dilma the same way. The situation was not even close to this. Lula was, in terms of indigenous lands, he was very good, as was Fernando Henrique Cardoso before him. We saw the growth of the number and the size of those lands. But on the top of that, a few years ago, even before Bolsonaro, the Brazilian Supreme Court decided that the executive branch cannot, and FUNAI cannot, by itself, create new indigenous lands. That has to pass through Congress right now, which is really, really difficult. Just remember those numbers that I showed you, 247 members of the rural caucus. So it's going to be really difficult to see in the near future new indigenous lands.
Yeah, I'm sure more questions will arise, but I want to give you some 15 minutes more for your
Probably
talk
don't
if you
need-
need that, but
Okay,
yeah.
I'm about to finish, I guess. Well, 'cause this is the thing I wasn't supposed to talk much about, the pesticides problem in Brazil, which is, I guess, it's still silent. I just downloaded yesterday, going from here to Brasília. I downloaded a very nice book by a Brazilian professor. It's available in English. It's called the Atlas of Pesticides in Brazil. It's incredible. The amount of the quality of information that there is there. It's free. Anyone can download. Perhaps I can find it here and show you the link in a few minutes. This is not from the book. It's from another source. But basically shows the size of the Brazilian pesticide market compared to other countries. Number 2 is the US, of course. And we are way larger than, almost 50% larger than the US. And we have very little regulation at this point, and very, very little control. We kind of have a good law, but not control on the field to see what's going on with pesticide use in Brazil. Today we had, well, not today, this data is from 2014, from the book. And we had the 2 probably most dramatic years, where this year and the previous year, in terms of new products reaching the market. But by that time, 5 years ago, we had 504 active ingredients registered in Brazil. And 150, about a third of that, had already been banned here in Europe. Some of them in the United States. The United States is very liberal in terms of pesticide control. We have to have that in mind. And among the top 10 most sold active ingredients, 2 were banned in Europe. And I know for sure that another one has climbed this list last year, which is paraquat. Paraquat is responsible for most of the accidents with intoxication in Brazil with pesticides. It's funny because my first job was like 30 years ago. I have to confess, I was hired to sell that kind of stuff. I did not sell 1 liter. I'm proud to say I was the worst employee in the company. Thanks God. And paraquat was one of the products that my company was selling at that time. And people, and I read the same information, it's usually used in suicides. And people are suspecting that it's not only the weapon of suicide, it's the cause of suicide. Because why would someone take paraquat? Because it's a horrible, horrible death. You're going to suffer, it's going to take hours, maybe days, you are going to die for sure, but you're going to suffer. So why does farmers drink paraquat? Some people today suspect that paraquat has effects on your brain. It turns out that you got depressed in the first place because of the kind of job and the kind of product that you had been using. How can we get out of this situation? That's the question. This environmental crisis and maybe, hopefully, the democratic crisis as well. That's really hard to answer. I don't think Brazil by itself is going to get out of this situation today. You probably know former President Lula was just released from jail last Friday, I guess. Thursday, which is good, but which also polarizes politics even more. I think it was good news for Bolsonaro, as strange as it may sound, but it was because people who hate the PT, the Workers' Party, and people who hate Lula especially, they are kind of, going back to Bolsonaro. He was kind of becoming discredited because so many mistakes, so many bad decisions. But not now. I suspect that his power is we are gonna see his popularity, and we have measurements of that every month or every 2 months. So probably by December we're gonna have news on that. And I suspect it's gonna be bad news. And polarization, of course, is good for both, perhaps for Lula, although he won't be able to be the candidate in the next election unless we change the laws or unless the Supreme Court rules that his trial was a fraud, which could happen. There are some evidence that was a fraud, but we don't know what's going on in the minds of the members of the Supreme Court in Brazil. Well, and there is pressure, which has worked in the past, pressure from abroad, from the international community. Of course, there will be resistance because we have this anti-globalist rhetoric, and a lot of Brazilians believe in that. Most Brazilians don't know what's going on in Amazonia. A lot of Brazilians don't care. They care about jobs, they care about income, which are, it's legitimate to care about those things, but they don't see the connections, or they don't want to look at those connections. So it's pretty easy to blame the indigenous, the NGOs, the United Nations, because they are pressing us. But there is something interesting here, because this kind of pressure can hurt the pockets of the ranchers and farmers in Brazil. And I will give one example that's not related at all with the environment. In his first weeks in power, President Bolsonaro decided to move the Brazilian embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Why did he do that? Because President Trump was doing the same, and he likes Trump, and said, well, I'm going to follow this guy. He's so successful. Within a few weeks, the Minister of Agriculture, which is very smart, very prepared, and a few other members of the rural caucus, they went there and said, President, please don't do that. Because the Arab countries, they are our #1 trade partner in terms of poultry. They're very important in beef too, and a few other commodities. And those guys, they are gonna act against us. And it's gonna hurt agriculture in Brazil, it's gonna hurt the economy in Brazil. Because agriculture, unfortunately, is what's really holding the Brazilian economic growth close to zero, otherwise we would be plunging right now. They're very sensitive about money, about trading. So in that case, and I guess it has a lot to do with indigenous rights too, human rights, the international community may be sensitive to that kind of thing. Well, of course, global warming is very important, but human rights too, and perhaps if that kind of pressure, which I call the boomerang effect, goes and bounces back in their heads, if that kind of pressure builds up, again, as the Minister of Agriculture did in the beginning of this year, they can go back to Bolsonaro and say, stop doing this, stop this crazy, And we heard, Fab and I heard from a very prominent person in the Brazilian government who knows everything about environmental politics, that she, the Minister of Agriculture, is the one who is containing the President and the Minister of Environment. Otherwise, things would be even worse. So she kind of sees there is a boundary. We cannot cross this boundary. And perhaps we have crossed already. So she's very smart. She's very sensitive. She's a woman. Perhaps that's the way to stop crazies in Brazil. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you. Well, I give first the floor to Fabio de Castro. I don't know, there's some people in the back. Maybe it's nice if you stand up. Yeah.
Were they here? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you, Fabiano, for this very interesting, nice presentation. For me, it's very hard to comment on their presentation because we've been discussing so much about these issues lately together. So there are a few things that we already, I told you, and then we agree many things. But my position here is to come up with some critical points. Sure. So I'm going to play my role here. So I would start with the beginning when you talk about the changes, the relevance of the rural caucus in making this transition, this change, or this radical change from the government that was before to a right-wing government. I tend to agree that I think they have a very important point there. The number is large, but I would argue that maybe it's too maybe a bit of simplistic way to think about just one dimension of the problem, because together with the rural caucus, there were other aspects in the Brazilian society at that moment that also played a major role. Religion, right? Also the financial crisis. That also the financial group that was not necessarily part of the rural caucus, the banks in Brazil were very powerful in that period, and together they kind of built up this narrative, a more nationalist narrative, and went to they kind of capture the process from this, the dissatisfaction of society, and they turned it into something completely different, the green and yellow movement, and then it turned out to be like against the PT, the Progressive Party. So I would ask you if you think that the rural caucus is enough to explain this process, or if you have to look at a little bit more the complexity of these different aspects playing together. This is one question. The second question is when you see the rural caucus, that actually is very relevant in Brazil. I would also argue that they were also relevant in the previous government as well. So maybe the question here, two questions I think I would raise here. One, maybe we are looking too much in the executive, in the president aspects in Brazil, but we are looking at the wrong things. Maybe we should be looking at the parliament, which is where the game is played much more. The government that is, the president that's in place there is the one that is the most satisfactory for that caucus in that particular moment. Because Lula was exactly playing the same game together. They were, it was going along with this caucus, and then now they are very powerful again. And my question is, why they wanted then to change to an ultra right wing if they're already doing okay? So that's the second point. My last point that I would like to ask you is about the fact that you put 4 or 5 points for the populist.
11.
No, but that you 5, right?
Yeah.
And I was just looking at like the globalism, for example, right? The globalism that the government is against, and then against the EU, that UN is saying that UN actually plays the game for certain groups. It's not a global. Well, I think we do have this criticism towards UN as well, right? Maybe UN is playing to certain blocs more than the other blocs. It's a little bit partial. So the globalism is something that also the left wing was, it also has criticism about. NGOs. If I go back to my own research, I have some criticism about NGOs in the past as well, about some aspects of NGOs, but not the same that they're setting fire, like Bolsonaro is saying. But I was wondering if you think, what do you think about the fact that the government now is creating these enemies? In a way, it limits us, researchers, to be more vocal about our criticism about those actors, because might make people think that we are actually supporting Bolsonaro in this. So how do you think us researchers, who have also critical approach towards certain actors, should we act in this very polarized moment? I'll leave it up to you.
Thank you. Can I just add one?
Yeah, sure.
Since Fabio, this is also a kind of question amongst friends, but one thing I would like you to briefly explain how this rural caucus can be so big when we're talking about an urbanized country and most of the electorate being in cities. So maybe you can just explain a little bit how that works, because it sounds like a very important power holder in Brazilian politics, whether it's under Bolsonaro or under other government. And I would like to connect what you were talking about to our whole environmental governance project, where we were jointly trying to understand processes in Latin America, and I fully agree with you that what is in that book there, well, they're still not relevant. And it's an open access book, so I very much invite you to look it up and look at chapters that you wrote and that we wrote and other colleagues wrote. But what we were saying there is like we like to understand environmental governance as a social process, and definitely not just something coming from the government. But governance also including informal processes, also including the kind of bottom-up practices and reactions and the interactions with what is happening at that top level. So I would like to invite you to tell a little bit more. You already started a little bit with, for instance, how now indigenous groups and movements are reacting to Bolsonaro's take on environmental policy. But maybe also a bit more widely, like what is the tendency now that, you know, his policy or his direction has become very clear, and also the people that he put in power, how are the dynamics changing? How are social movements reacting, or just producers also outside of this rural caucus? So how is environmental governance in Brazil reshaped?
Okay.
Yeah.
Very difficult question. Let me start with Fabio's last one, which is really difficult to address. How can we people who are committed to the environment, human rights, how can we address the problems before this government without being accused or identify as someone who's supporting the Bolsonaro government? I really don't know how to do that. It's really hard. I've been accused of being neoliberal during the Dilma years, because accused by my students because I was too harsh on Dilma. It's easy when someone is in office, it's easy to criticize from our standpoint, but in a situation like this, when the country is polarized, anything that you say can be just extracted off the context. Say, look, Fábio de Castro or CEDLA is supporting Bolsonaro, which is of course not the case. I really don't know how to deal with that kind of question. I don't have a good answer, so I will address, maybe I'll be able to come back to that later. I will address this question about the rural caucus. Why is it so strong? And wasn't it so strong in the past? Why has it changed all of a sudden? It's been growing. It has been growing, well, since the Constitution. They start with this protection of land property rights. They had a lot of space in the government, in the executive branch during the Cardoso government, and during Lula's government. If you look back, the ministers of agriculture, the first minister appointed by Lula was Roberto Rodrigues, which is not a radical right-wing leader. He was not a member of this caucus. He was the president of the Brazilian Organization of Cooperatives. It was more moderate. And then we had Blairo Maggi. Blairo Maggi is the largest single soybean producer in the world. He has farms that are...
He became the minister?
He was the minister.
Okay.
Yes, yes. But somehow, well, he was involved in things like the soybean roundtable, the idea of not purchase soybeans produced in Amazonia. It was a kind of, I can't say that he's moderate. He was awarded the Chainsaw Award by Greenpeace, I guess. And so was the following minister, who was Cátia Abreu. Cátia Abreu also was awarded the Chainsaw Award. So they were, Cátia Abreu especially, she was supporting deforestation in the Cerrado, the development of Cerrado for farming and ranching. And the caucus was becoming bigger and bigger. Why? I don't know. First, I think there is one answer is the Brazilian electoral system. We have, it's a majority vote. We don't have this districtal vote. So, and there is the representation is kind of skewed. Someone in São Paulo, the vote in São Paulo has less weight than the vote in Acre or Roraima, Pará. So in that case, that could explain part of this problem. We're having more and more representatives of the rural, the farmers. And they have capillarity. I think that's the thing. Fabio's right, because we cannot explain all this change only based on the size and the strength of the rural caucus. And we used to say in Brazil that we have the big 3Bs caucus in Congress. The Bible caucus, the bullets, which are the military, retired military people who support guns, and well, in English, the bovines, the boi, bancada do boi. But they kind of overlap, and they overlap a lot. A lot of people are part of the three groups. Those are the most conservative people in Brazil. But yeah, I think we need more explanation on the growth of the neo-Pentecostal church in Brazil. That's probably the most conservative force that has been growing for years in Brazil. Although I'm not so sure about the role they play in environmental politics. In general picture, yes, they are very important. So, but I guess the importance of the rural caucus is that first, this capillarity. They are all over Brazil. They influence voters, and we're talking people who were already in office, so they had all the privilege of being a federal representative, all the resources that they have, and they started promoting Bolsonaro way before the legal political campaign, because we have a time slot for campaigning, which is kind of limited today in Brazil. But the Bolsonaro campaign started way before that in the rural areas. And I had a lot of students go into the field, and they would come back and say, I can't believe this. You know, Bolsonaro is growing. At that point, in places like Brasília, São Paulo, Rio, nobody really believed that he had chances of winning or even going to the second round. So they use that capillarity. And the other question is, why now and not before? That's a good one too. Why the rural caucus was already strong, so why did they decide to act right now? I think it's kind of strategy. First, because it was really hard to act against Lula, because Lula invited Blairo Maggi to be his minister. Lula is someone just incredible. I'm not saying that I love Lula, I don't even like Lula, but he's a very good politician. He's capable of coming inside this place and being friends with everybody, and he'll tell what we want to listen, that's for sure. And then he go downstairs and tell something completely different to business people, for instance. As he kept, he did that with farmers, with social movements, with the landless movement, and he gives you something in exchange for something else. That's what politicians are supposed to do. We don't like that sometimes, but that's their job, and he was very good at that. So he gave a lot to the rural caucus, and we can probably think of the agricultural policies. Those policies were very good. People wanted more credit, wanted to open the markets for Brazilian commodities, and Lula was really engaged in that. So there was a quid pro quo. So they accepted the environmental legislation. And I think there is a difference. When Dilma took power, those things started changing, because he wasn't able to talk to anyone. She was the opposite of Lula. She could close the doors to the social movements and to the ruralists at the same time. And that was the end of her government. She was, to some extent, she's to blame for what happened to her, because in a polarized Congress like Brazil, in a conservative Congress, you gotta have some, what we call the jogo de cintura. You have to be plotted, you know, move, dance along the middle. And I think there is this thing that nobody ever raised the voice against the environmental social movements as Bolsonaro did. So we saw a change in the tone of politics and the rhetoric in Brazil, because, well, he did that for 30 years. He likes to, as all the populists, he likes to present himself as an alternative to traditional politicians, but he's been a traditional politician for his whole life, and he brought his 3 kids to the same path. So you can say it's a traditional, very, very traditional Brazilian political group, like the Sarney or like the Mayas and others like that. So, but his rhetoric, for some reason, was more appealing this time, because the field was level. You know, the environmental movement is really weak. We got a lot of things that we wanted. Why not more? So that's the moment, and we have a candidate, because we never saw anyone like that. People say things, horrible things about indigenous like this. Certainly, the rural caucus thought the same things. They think the same about indigenous, but there wasn't a political opportunity to just go out of the closet and say, well, we are racist, and by the way, we want our land. So now it's just the perfect moment. Bolsonaro presented himself as the perfect opportunity for that. What else? Yeah? You got more?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, feel free to jump in, and of course this is a talk about Brazil, but maybe some comparisons also.
Yeah.
You know other places than Brazil and what's
if
going
you know,
on there. Yes.
the audience
So
knows.
yeah. So go ahead. Yeah.
That's kind of my question, actually. I was just wanted to pick you up a little bit, Fabiano, on the concept of populism. What populism mean? Because you're right. At the start, you rightly pointed out that it's this sort of global trend, if you like, populism emerging in different kinds of places. But then, if you look at Brazil, Bolsonaro, you know, came really from the kind of military dictatorship background, so you might call him authoritarian, not populist. But he has now a neoliberal, very strongly neoliberal economic minister. So you know, some people are calling this global trend as authoritarian neoliberalism, which would maybe overlap with some of the points you're making about the rural caucus and agricultural interests. So what's going on here? Populism? Is that too simplistic? Authoritarian neoliberalism? What's happening in Brazil, but linked to global movements?
Well, okay, I will go back to Fabio's question with yours, because the neoliberal side of the question. Neoliberals are part of this democratic crisis. So they saw the question. Said, well, we are not racist. I don't know. We are not homophobic. I really don't know for sure. We don't like this anti-globalist, but you know, we are gonna accept that if he gives us something else, which is the end of our pension system in Brazil, which has been delivered so far. Probably fiscal reform that's going to be good for them, for the rich, with its promise, and things like that. And after that, they say, well, if they can stand Bolsonaro or not, it's going to be useful. Bolsonaro was not neoliberal until last year. He is Minister of Economy. Paulo Guedes is a real hard-time Chicago boy. The last one, I guess, he's the only one looking at Chile and say, wow, we have a good example here, we should follow Chile. He's the last one. But there is something interesting about the literature. One of the elements of populism, an opportunistic lack of ideological coherence or consistency. That's Bolsonaro. I saw on YouTube something like that. Bolsonaro, a few years ago, making compliments to Lula. And I think it was related to our pension system in Brazil. So people can just change their minds really fast if they see a good opportunity. And again, I don't think the literature on populism rules out authoritarianism. It's part of. Usually you don't have to be authoritarian to get in power. Populism is a very good tool, you know, all the rhetoric to mobilize people against the traditional elites and everything else, and you get elected, and then you become authoritarian. And yeah, well, he has this military background, and he has militarized the whole government, except for Paulo Guedes' minister. The rest, you can see the military are all over because, and I think the idea is that the military follow orders. They're not concerned about listening to society, social movements, or the internal bureaucracy, which is, by the way, resisting the change that we see in the environment. There is a WhatsApp group by the environmental agency, IBAMA, the staff. It's anonymous, nobody knows who controls the list. And they publish all sorts of things that are happening or people are trying to do inside IBAMA. You know, so we see things like that. The public servants are trying to resist. That's why they have the military right now. And on the top of that, Bolsonaro is very suspicious that anyone who has worked in the past for the Workers' Party is a communist. It's kind of delusional because, you know, we have tenure in our jobs in Brazil, public servants, so people are there to work for the state. People have been there working for Fernando Henrique Cardoso, for Lula, for Dilma, for Temer. They are gonna go there, they're gonna be there during the Bolsonaro years and hopefully for the next government. So it's just silly to think about that, but that's the way he frames things. I need to go back and go deeper in this literature to see all this nuance because it's really hard to define populism, and that's the kind of word that I have heard and I have used many times in my life, but it's really hard to grasp what is the concept behind the word populism. I kind of like it, these 11 elements, but I was just skimming the literature, I haven't really made an effort to understand all the angles that the literature has.
We have at least two more questions, yes, Daniel?
Thank you. I just wanted to go to another thing that you mentioned about the oil spill in the Northeast that is coming south. It seems to be a huge disaster, and yet it's not getting, as far as I know, the same attention as it was when there were the fires in the Amazon. There is a sort of enigma where it's coming from, and there are a lot of. I wonder if you could say something about that. So I think the timing was very bad for Bolsonaro because it was this huge mega leilaão of the South.
The auction, the
auction. So I wonder if you could comment on that.
Yeah. Well, I think first that there is this problem. Why do we pay so much attention? No, let me rephrase. I know why, and we should pay so much attention to deforestation and fires, but we don't pay a lot of attention to other environmental problems, like pesticides, or to me, what I consider the most pressing environmental problem in Brazil, which is the death of São Francisco River, one of our main rivers. It's really dying, and we're not doing anything. And the oil spills, that in Brazil, that caught the attention of the general population, the media, because it's the beach. We're supposed to go there in December and January, have a nice time, drink a caipirinha, but now there is oil there. And I think it shows, on one hand, that Brazil is not prepared to deal with that. We should not be selling rights to extract oil from the sea if we are not prepared to deal with the risks which are part of the business. And we are not. Clearly we are not. And you see the difference in technology. We can monitor deforestation in real time, but we cannot so far, and nobody has been able to identify the source of that oil spill, which may be still spilling. We don't know what's happening. It's like it's coming from the bed of the ocean. There are hypotheses, but no one has confirmed the origin of the spill. But it shows that we need to invest more in environmental technology, in our environmental structure. We need to monitor oil really closely, really carefully, because we have a lot of oil wells, drilling operations close to Rio de Janeiro and São Paulo, very, very close. If something like that happens again, it could spread all over the coast again and reach Uruguay, Argentina, I don't know. So I don't think we have good models to follow the oil spills. But instead of investing in that, that's what our government should be doing right now. They're blaming Greenpeace, they're blaming the media, they're blaming IBAMA, the environmental agents, for being too slow, or I don't know. So we're in the wrong direction concerning the oil spill. Oh, sorry.
You didn't say it as explicit as I would like to hear it, but it seems that he changed his mind on Bolsonaro to have an embassy moving to Jerusalem. Can you give more examples of those influential people around him who made him change his mind on some specific item?
Let me see if I think this is just the best example, but
He saluted the USA flag when he was in the US, remember?
yeah, but well, in that case, nobody was there to control him. He went all the way with his stupid move to salute the US flag. Let me see if try to remain.
The dissolution of the environmental ministry, which was also.
Oh yes, that was part of his plan. He didn't want a ministry at all. So he decided to put a convict there.
Also because of the
Minister of
Yes, there is a Christian Minister of Agriculture said, no, we need that. Because Bolsonaro wanted her to have all the structure of the Minister of the Environment. He said, no, I don't want this. I cannot deal with this, and it's not good for me. It's not good for my job. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's a very good answer.
So there's also international pressure, I think, right? Because based on the international pressure, he sent the army into the Amazon to look what's going on with all the fires.
I think so far the international pressure has been working against the cause, because he builds up on that. Say, well, like he did with France, because they mentioned something like Amazonia is ours too, which is true in the case of France because they have a piece of Amazonia. But I don't think Bolsonaro knows that. But people regrouped after that. So it's kind of that's something that we should be careful about. When we put pressure, it's going to be really, really consistent with a larger strategy. And I think it was part of one of the questions on the social movements and the NGOs. Other than Greenpeace, the Brazilian NGOs are kind of quiet. I don't know why. Well, one of the hypotheses, most of the Brazilian NGOs get money from the government, so they are finishing her projects, and perhaps after that, because there won't be any money. For instance, I know some NGOs who have been working with the Amazon Fund, the money that was donated from the Norwegian, by the Norwegian government and the German government to Brazil. Few NGOs were working with that money, very nice projects, but it's over right now. They're finishing, wrapping up the projects, and there won't be any sort of second phase, things like that. Maybe they will have to react after that. Otherwise, they won't survive. Greenpeace does not receive money from governments or corporations, so they have this autonomy. And the indigenous movement, they are really, really leading the resistance right now, because they know they have a lot to lose. They are losing, so they have to do that. And we have, I think, just one indigenous representative in Congress today, but she's very strong and she's using the resource that the representatives have to help the indigenous people. That's been very useful too. But it's not new. The indigenous, they have been working new strategies. They have been organized for the past years. And they're right when they say that they also fought Lula and especially Dilma, because if you look at the Belo Monte Dam, which really messed up indigenous lands in Pará and Mato Grosso, they had to resist and they had to organize from that point on. So probably they are at the forefront of this resistance right now. But they will need this money, funding, and probably that's going to have to come from other countries, from international networks of activists and NGOs.
Let's collect a few more questions. Matthijs, one at the back.
Probably an easy one. I've never quite understood the rule that says that as a landowner you can legally cut 20% of your land if it's outside protected areas, because that does presuppose a kind of zero measurement, an adequate let's say system of registration, so as to avoid that any new owner of that land starts again to cutting down 20% of the land, whereas that 20% has been cut previously. So how does it work in practice? Does it really function as a barrier to cutting down woods on your land, or?
And maybe you need to explain it a little bit, because I got confused.
Okay.
Yeah.
Our first code determines that in Amazonia you have to leave 8% of your forests untouched. In other parts of the country, it's 20%. And in some regions between Amazonia and Cerrado, 35%. It kind of works because you can get a fine, but there are many ways to get away with the fine without paying. So the law was good, but it was really hard to enforce. It's been hard to enforce. The rural register was supposed to solve that problem, because you could really put on the map where that patch of forest is. So it was not there, and the next day, sometime the next day, you can send someone from Ibama and issue a fine. That's how it kind of worked. At some point, people started to divide in their lands. Sell the land I will sell to my sons, and they can cut 10% to in Amazon. So there are some mechanisms. People still do that. It's really hard to control because we don't have a good land register. But that's the kind of thing that people do to trick the law. And some places they just don't care. You can cut again, and we have regrowth, but that's why now because you could claim this is not original forest. I'm just clearing land that I had cleared like 12 years ago. Your satellite got wrong, and sometimes it's really hard to, depending on the stage of growth, to tell the difference between forest and secondary growth. But people used to do that. Again, that's why they decide to have this very fine-tuned land register system, which is not going to work, we know that for sure. So probably the law is going to be weaker than ever.
Yeah, I was maybe just building up on the international pressure question. I hope I'm not repeating anyone's question before me, but I see that you point out into two directions in terms of international pressure. On the one hand, it might backfire because it fuels the nationalist discourse, but on the other hand as well, on your slides, there was this kind of supply chain pressure that can contribute to actually enforcing, or undermining the environmental crisis. So. Yeah, also on the matter of pesticides, I just think it's very interesting that sometimes the pesticides are forbidden elsewhere, but still through the imports, the pesticides they get into the markets, for example. So maybe my question is just like this tension between international pressure that can contribute and international pressure which can undermine.
Okay. Well, I think pressure coming from the supply chains are really, really helpful because it's going to reach the pockets of the rural caucus, and we are going to change our Minister of Agriculture is going to walk to the Itamaraty and talk to Bolsonaro and say, no, don't do that because it's hurting us. If you say, no, let's send international troops to Amazonia, even the left wing is going to say, no, we don't want that. We need to solve that problem by, by our own. How to engage in this kind of pressure through the market is another question. This country is really important in terms of that. Think of soybeans. The Netherlands are big buyers of soybeans, so they should be part of the solution. The soybean roundtable is being challenged by the Brazilians. You probably know that. They went to court. They said that's against free market. They are supposed to sell soybeans to anyone who wants to buy. That's the idea, invisible hand of the market. Some people wanted that not only to keep the soybean roundtable in Amazonia, but to have a second phase in the Cerrado, which you talk about deforestation a little bit here in Amazonia, but things in the Cerrado are much worse. We don't have the same kind of data monitoring, and we don't have protected areas as big as the ones we have in Amazonia, not to mention indigenous lands. We don't have many, and they're small. So the Cerrado is the frontier, the soybean frontier today, and it's growing really, really fast. And it's probably in a way that it's more aggressive than what happened in Amazonia, because in Amazonia we had a lot of public money, which was cut off some time. So we don't have good infrastructure today, but in Cerrado the infrastructure is really better, and now we have those hedge funds going there and buying land. So they buy like 400,000 hectares, 500,000 hectares, and divide that in 2 or 3 or 4 different farms and rent the farms. So those people don't need the government anymore. They don't need the government to acquire land. They don't need the government for credit. They have private credit. And they don't need the government in terms of technology and technical assistance. So it's out of control. It's a frontier out of control. But anyway, I think the market is taking too long to react. I wish we had seen already something like the Arabs suggest to do when they move the embassy. Where we are going to do. Be sure that we are going to do something against you, Brazil. But concerning deforestation, not so far. That's kind of a problem.
Yeah, it goes a bit in a similar direction also with the international community.
Can you speak up a little? We can.
Sorry, it goes in a similar direction.
Yeah.
My question was more related, like giving the rejections also of international involvement based on mainly the sovereignty discourse. To what extent do you believe that international cooperation can still be helpful in tackling the Amazon fires, specifically like in the light of regional actors? If you look at the integration processes that have been happening in Latin America, South America specifically, how can those international cooperations with the neighbors that are also sharing the Amazon forest, how can that still be helpful, or what do you see as a chance there, or not?
International corporations.
Yeah.
Well,
Cooperation.
And regional, no?
Yeah,
regional
like
cooperation,
but
neighboring
not
countries.
targeted on the regional level.
I don't see Bolsonaro cooperating with Venezuela. He's not into cooperation. The first thing he liked that the fires in Amazonia where the Amazonia was burning everywhere, in Bolivia especially. So, look, the Bolivians, Evo Morales, the indigenous are burning the Amazon too. So it's just a, a climate problem, although there isn't any big global climate problem in the world. So
sorry, I'm not only talking on like government levels, but also on all like sort of also non-state actor levels of like direct regional impact.
I think non-state actors are pretty weak in Latin America to cooperate to solve a problem as big as this one. I don't think I don't see. Maybe the indigenous can engage. They are more connected today in the Amazon basin, at least. That kind of collaboration is going to be helpful, but I'm not sure it's going to be decisive. Concerning all other social movements, environmental movements, I really don't think so, because our neighbors don't have money to. The government cut funding from the Amazon Fund, and our NGOs are suffering. So the neighboring countries are even in a worse situation than Brazil right now. So it's probably we have to come from Europe in terms of networks, NGO networks, activist networks from Europe, maybe the United States, if the winds of change blow there too. They don't know what's going to happen. But regionally, we're pretty weak at this point.
So I see, like I try to talk to a bunch of people about the situation in Brazil, and in my family there is a big divide of people supporting Bolsonaro. I think you can relate to that also probably.
All Brazilians.
Yeah. So in these discussions, the one thing that they bring over and over again is the corruption scandals. So they say the left participated and orchestrated, and they didn't tackle this problem with the urgency and necessity that it has to be done. So it's like they're exchanging, like they know Bolsonaro is not ideal, but they see him as a guy that's going to solve the corruption problem. Mm-hmm. And from the example of Chile, our neighbor, that's neoliberal to the extreme, we see that the politics of neoliberalism is not going to work for Brazil, because we already have a very unequal society, and that's only going to grow with these austerity programs, and they put a ceiling on government spending, and they say the minimum wage is not going to go up for I don't know how many years more. So I see that these two forces playing against each other. I'd like to know from you if you see any political leaders that are coming up that could maybe solve this debacle and bring people together instead of pushing them over to the left or to the right.
Well, I wish I saw politicians doing that. At this point, there isn't any in Brazil. So I see. I believe that polarization is going to be worse in the next months. We have elections for mayors next year in Brazil, so people are going to still will be tapping on this corruption discourse, which is just ridiculous. I'm not saying that the PT was not corrupt, nor the opposite. I'm not a member of the court. But if you look at that strong caucus, most of them were involved in some of the scandals. So it has not ended corruption, we know that. Even if the Lula trial was clean and honest, that would not mean that we solved the problem. The problem is still there. But there is something in the minds of people I don't know, and that's something that psychologists probably would answer. When you frame something like PT is the, as they used to say, the largest gang in the world. A maior quadrilha do mundo. People start believing that. Even if you prove, and I'm not saying that the president is involved with the militias in Rio, people will still believe that PT was the largest gang in the world. Until something happens and there is a tipping point. Because Lula left government, he had an approval rate of almost 8%. It's just unbelievable how people change their minds so fast and how people hate him so much today. The same people who loved him 6-7 years ago. it's really hard to explain that, why people just lock in those positions ideologically and cannot open their minds. The same thing, I always was very critical of the PT government, especially Dilma's government, but it's really hard to admit that today because people say, oh no, so it gotta be Bolsonaro, that's the solution.
You have two options.
Two options, exactly. That's the political scenario in Brazil today. Two options. I think that the third option failed miserably, which was Ciro Gomes. I voted for him in the first round. And he and PT are to blame. He went to Curitiba, he talked to Lula. They were not able to make an agreement to have just one candidate. He was not in the second ballot. He left Brazil, saying nasty things about the PT and Haddad. So he was kind of burning the bridge. And I don't see anyone this far trying to rebuild any kind of bridge in Brazil. On the contrary, I think people are trying to say, well, if Lula cannot be the candidate, I will try to take his votes. Or if Bolsonaro, for some reason, won't be the candidate, I will try to be the right-wing representative, like Dori in São Paulo and Vitz in Rio. They are trying to occupy that political space. But there isn't common ground anywhere so far.
Thank you so much, Fabiano.
Thank you.
Let's continue over drinks, but
Yes.
let's close the formal part of this meeting here. Thank you again.
Thank you.
The right and the far right have been mentioned a few times here. On the 12th and 13th of December, CEDLA, together with ACES, the Amsterdam Center on European Studies, is organizing a two-day conference on the far right in Europe and in Latin America. So you can look at the CEDLA website to see more information. There will be quite a few important speakers talking also about populism next. I think you need to come back in a month. But you're all welcome, and that is 12th and 13th December. Let's go for drinks.